Howdy everybody! Today I'm going to walk you on how you can build a very own traffic light sequence in COGS. So for this build, we're going to rely heavily on loop behavior. This is one of the areas we covered in the last unit. So if you're not comfortable with loops yet, feel free to pause the video and revisit that section on loops. Now here's what we're going to need for this build. We need, of course, the COGS digital master, 2 Ethernet cables, 2 RJ45 breakouts, 6 LED lights for our traffic lights, 2 red, 2 yellow, and 2 green. And if possible, a latching button would be great. Now, don't worry even if you don't have all the physical hardware in front of you, because you can still follow along just fine, because the logic and the behaviors, all of it can entirely be done within the COGS software. Now, as always, all the project files are available for download. So let's get this party started, shall we? Now, this build can be separated into 2 parts. First, we'll create a single traffic light that cycles through yellow, green, and red with the right timing. And then we can duplicate this traffic light behavior to create our second light for the intersection. Remember, we also have to create an emergency stop behavior that turns both lights to red to allow emergency vehicles free passage through the intersection. But before we get to all that, let's make sure our digital master is connected properly to our COGS software. So to do that, we head into the connect module, and this green light tells us we're good to go. Now let's set up our output and input channels. Now to do that, we head into the build module, and we can find our channels panel right there. So let's add our LED output channels. Perfect. Now we also know that we need a digital input channel, which is a button that we'll press to turn on and turn off the traffic lights for the emergency stop. So that is a digital input. Perfect. All right, so now let's wire up our LED lights as well as our button. If you look quite closely, you can see that our LEDs have one long leg and one short leg. The long leg is the positive end and the short leg is the negative end. We know from our learner board that the first slot is negative, the second one is positive. So if you look at our RJ45 breakout cable, we can see that it's nicely numbered right here. So 1 would be negative, 2 positive, 3 negative, and so on. I can give them a little tug to make sure that they're secured in properly, and it looks like all of them are. Now it's time to add our digital input channel. So a latching button is perfect for this case because you can switch it to the on position and it stays there, and then you can switch it to the off position for the override and it also stays there. That's why it's a better choice than a momentary switch or momentary button. So unlike the LED, the orientation in which you wire it doesn't actually matter. So I'll go ahead and wire it up. All right, let's give it a good tug to make sure it's secured in properly. So this is what we have for our first traffic light. So let's go ahead and patch all our LEDs and our button to our ports on the digital master. We know we set up our green light to be port 1A. We can click this button to test it out. Looks like it's working. Our yellow, we set it up to 1B. We can also test it out. And our red, we set it up to 1C. So we can test that out as well. And our start stop button was set up to 1D. We can turn it on. This light tells us it's working just fine. Great. Now here comes the fun part. Let's head into the build module and start building in our behaviors to make the sequence actually work. But before we start building our behaviors, let's think through the logic of our traffic light sequence. This sequence is essentially a loop that repeats the same colors with a set amount of time on each one. Here's the sequence we're trying to build. We start things off with yellow, and then we go to red, and then we have red and yellow together, and then we go to green, and then finally back to yellow again. Notice the timing of the stop phase, the red light and the red and yellow together. It adds up to 5 seconds. The go phase, which is the green, plus the yellow, also adds up to 5 seconds. That symmetry is going to matter a lot when we build in our second traffic light and we try to perfectly synchronize them to exhibit opposite behaviors. So let's head into the build module and we can start programming our behaviors. So we want to build our first traffic light behavior and we use a states match. We call this traffic light 1. This is because we want to match a button press to start the sequence to the button that we just wired up. So when the button is pressed, we want to go ahead and start our loop behavior. So we want to kick things off with a yellow light on, and then we want to wait 2 seconds and we want to turn it off, and then turn red on, and then we want to wait 3 seconds, after which we want to turn the yellow back on again and wait 2 seconds with both lights on this time, and then finally turn both the yellow and the red off, and then the green comes on for 3 seconds. And then finally we turn the green off to complete our sequence. Let's test it out. So we can head into the run module and we can actually start our test. So let's turn on our switch. We can see that it's working properly, so great. So now let's handle what happens in an emergency stop situation. We need to build a behavior called the emergency stop or the sequence stop behavior that will turn all lights off except the red lights to allow emergency vehicles free passage through our intersection. So to do that, we add a new behavior, which is also a states match. We want to match the button press, the off button press, to start this behavior. So let's have, let's call it stop sequence. And here's what we want. When the switch is turned off, go ahead and stop what behavior? We want to stop the traffic light loop. So what the stop behavior does, it ends or freezes the traffic light loop. But that's not enough. Remember, COGS does exactly what we tell it. So if the orange light is on and we stop the loop, it doesn't turn off this orange light. So we actually need to tell COGS to turn the lights off. So we go on and add another action. We want to update our green light to off, our yellow light to off, and our red light to off. And now our stop behavior is complete. Let's say we decide not to tell COGS to turn off all these lights. Let's delete these new values to see what would happen if we just went on and stopped the sequence without turning off all these lights. So let's go ahead and start the sequence. And here's what happens when we stop it. The green light stays on. So this is clearly not what we want. So we clearly want COGS to turn off all the lights, and then we turn the red light on. Now let's add our second traffic light. Now the good news is we don't have to build everything from scratch. We just have to do everything we did before with the first traffic light and do it for the second one. So we know we need 3 additional LEDs, so let's head into the build module and go into the channels panel here. Now to save us a little bit of time, I've already added our 3 additional output channels. Now we have green 2, yellow 2, and red 2. I've already patched these to ports 2A, 2B, and 2C. So let's head back to our build module and we can add this additional behavior. We can actually duplicate the first traffic light behavior, and now we have exactly the same. So we only have to update everywhere where it says red 1 to red 2, green 1 to green 2, yellow 1 to yellow 2. I'll do that pretty quickly. Great! Looks like we're almost done, I would say. Let's see how it would work. Let's actually test this out. So it looks like our traffic lights are working, but they're working in perfect sync. And when that happens, bad things could happen. So we might want to find a way to offset the second traffic light so that it's not in perfect sync. Now, the symmetry we mentioned earlier now comes into play. We know that a full loop cycle is 10 seconds. So we have to delay the second traffic light by exactly half the loop cycle before it then triggers. And then after that, we must have our traffic lights in sync, exhibiting opposite behavior. Let's see how we can do that. So back in the build module, let's update our second traffic light behavior to incorporate a 5-second delay. Now our traffic lights should work in perfect sync. When one is red, the other one should be green, and the other way around. Now, one final thing that we must do is to update our stop sequence behavior to actually include our second traffic light. Remember, we're only stopping the behavior of the first one, and now that we've added an additional traffic light, we also need to update this behavior. So I will go ahead and duplicate everything and then just update and finally let's duplicate that, and all right, I think we're done. I think we're pretty much set. So congratulations, we've made it to the end. But before I leave you, let's recap everything we did today. We kicked things off by setting up our 6 LED output channels for our traffic lights. We went on to set up a digital input channel to start and stop our sequence. We built in 3 behaviors, traffic light 1, traffic light 2, and the stop sequence behavior that works as an emergency override. Pressing this button freezes the intersection, turns off all the lights, and sets both sides to red, giving emergency vehicles safe passage through. Now, if you're feeling extra confident, try to introduce yet another behavior that gives emergency vehicles a green light on one specific side and a red on the other, not just red on both sides. Try to think of any extra input and output channels you might need to achieve this. But for today, that's it from me, Joel. Until we meet again, build on.